Mr. Philip Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to take part in this debate today and to make the case to the House for backing the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, ensuring a smooth and orderly departure from the European Union, delivering on the referendum decision of the British people, and at the same time securing a close economic and security partnership with our nearest neighbours and most important trading partners. And to make the case for rejecting the calls, both of those who would prefer to plunge the country into the uncertainty and economic self-harm of no deal, and of those who would seek to undo the referendum decision, and in doing so fuel a narrative of betrayal which would undermine the broad consent on which our democratic politics is based. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Just a good way. Recently, the Chancellor said that backing the Prime Minister's deal will be better for the country than remaining in the EU. Yet back in February 2016, during the referendum campaign, he said a yes vote would lead to very significant uncertainty and would have a chilling effect on the economy. What information has the Chancellor got that he could share with the rest of us that has caused him to have such a fundamental change of opinion?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've always recognised that leaving the EU will have an economic cost. What the deal the Prime Minister has negotiated does is minimise that economic cost. We have a nation that is divided on this issue, and I fundamentally believe that we have to bring the country back together in order to succeed as a country in the future. And this deal offers a sensible compromise which protects our economy but delivers on the decision of the British people in the referendum. And my judgment is that if we want to maximise the chances of our nation being successful in the future, this is the right way to go. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Did he subscribe to the statement in the 2017 general election manifesto from the Conservative Party that no deal would be better than a bad deal?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and as I've said in this House many times, at the beginning of this process, there were people inside the European Union who were contemplating a punishment deal for the United Kingdom, a deal designed to punish us for having the audacity to decide to leave the European Union. Clearly, we could not have accepted such terms for our departure. I'll give way one more time to my honourable friend and I'll make a little progress.
I'm very grateful, thank you. The Chancellor mentioned at the beginning of his speech no deal. I wonder if you could explain what no deal is, because my understanding is that the rest of the world trades on WTO rules with independent free trade agreement. So there isn't actually any such thing as no deal, is there? Because everybody, if we did leave, and I don't buy the language crashing out, we would trade on WTO rules. That's not no deal, surely?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is no deal, and as I shall say later on in my speech, if we did leave the European Union without a deal, we would actually be the only advanced economy in the world trading with the European Union on pure WTO terms, with no facilitation agreements whatsoever. And in my view, that would be a very, very bad outcome for the United Kingdom. I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman, and then I will make some progress.
Grateful to him for giving way, and I agree with him that there will inevitably be an economic penalty from leaving the EU. Does he agree that having to comply with lots of rules set by the EU over which we will no longer have any say, which will be the position under the withdrawal agreement, that is part of the economic penalty that we will suffer?
Mr. Speaker, it depends very much on what those rules are. The rules around the goods acquis, the part of EU regulation that deals with goods, are very stable and have been for many, many years. We know that our manufacturers in this country will continue to follow EU rules on goods, whether we choose to adopt those rules or not. So I think the economic price of having such rules would be very small. In other areas, for example in financial services, where rules are changing very rapidly, where there's a great dynamism in the system, there could be much greater dangers for us in being locked in to following rules over which we had no influence. And that's why the deal that we're putting before the House proposes a very different way forward for goods than it does for services, and particularly financial services. Mr. Speaker, I have observed this process at close quarters for 2.5 years, and I'm absolutely clear about one thing. This deal is the best deal to exit the EU that is available or that is going to be available. The idea that there is an option of renegotiating at the 11th hour is simply a delusion. We need to be honest with ourselves. The alternatives to this deal are no deal or no Brexit. Either will leave us a fractured society and a divided nation. Only the compromise of this negotiated deal, delivering on the referendum result by leaving the EU, ending free movement of people and reasserting our sovereign control over our laws, while at the same time maintaining the closest possible trade, security and cultural links with the European Union to protect our jobs, our living standards and our values. Only that compromise can allow our country to move on. Only that compromise can bring us back together after Brexit is delivered. And we should remember the lesson of history, that divided nations are not successful nations. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. But does he agree with me it's important that we have a deal that is not just only good for the economy, but also one that brings our country together? Yes. And the deal on the table is one that offers that, and it's one that we should move forward with and unite our country.
I agree with my honourable friend, and that is the central theme of what I shall say to the House today. Yes, leaving the European Union has a cost, but going back on the decision of the British people would also have an enormous cost for our country. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you very much. Does my right honourable friend agree that uncertainty is bad for our economy and very bad for businesses?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and we are already paying a price and have paid a price for the uncertainty around our future trading relationship with the European Union. The sooner we can restore certainty, the sooner we can get back onto a path of solid economic growth. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Chancellor for allowing me to intervene, and he's being very generous with his time. Can the Chancellor clarify as to whether the government's analysis confirms that this half-baked Brexit deal that the government are pursuing will actually leave our country permanently poorer?
No, Mr. Speaker. In all scenarios, we expect that economic growth will continue. And the economy will carry on growing. What we are looking at in the analysis we published last week is a ranking order between 5 different scenarios of their impact on the overall size of the economy, looking out on a 15-year time horizon. Mr. Speaker, I will in just a moment. Let me make a little progress. Mr. Speaker, the theme for today's debate, as you've reminded the House, is the economy. And the economy has always been at the heart of the UK's relationship with Europe. It was definitely not, I was there and I remember, the lure of political union that brought Britain into the European Economic Community as it then was in 1973, but the prospect of jobs, wage growth, trade and prosperity. And for most of us who campaigned 43 years later to remain in the EU in 2016, it was certainly not the political institutions and the paraphernalia of the Union that provided the motivation to do so, but a hard-nosed appraisal of our economic interests. The fact is, our economic and trading relationship with the EU has been built over 45 years, and during that time, our economies have shaped themselves around each other and become inextricably intertwined. Supply chains crisscross borders, workforces draw on talent from across the continent. A firm in Birmingham can deal with a customer in Berlin as easily as one in Bradford. So much so that almost 65% of all UK trade is now with the EU or through EU trade agreements. These trading relationships and commercial partnerships were not built overnight, but in a no-deal exit, many of them would be destroyed overnight, as the market access and free-flowing borders on which they are based were lost. And while new trade partnerships with countries outside the EU undoubtedly offer new and exciting opportunities for UK companies, the analysis the government published last week is clear that the benefits flowing from new FTAs would not compensate for the loss of EU trade from a no-deal exit. I give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to the Chancellor. On Tuesday, the House of Commons Library wrote to me to say that the backstop comes into force automatically if the withdrawal agreement is signed at the end of the transition period. This morning, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "If we get to the point where it might be needed, we have a choice as to what we do, so we don't even have to go into the backstop at that point." Can the Chancellor help explain that? Because there seems to be a variance between those two statements.
The backstop remains as the ultimate default, but the agreement we've negotiated with the European Union, very importantly, gives us the choice. If we are not ready to move to our new future partnership on the 1st of January 2021, gives us a choice to seek an extension of the implementation period for a period of 1 or 2 further years. And that's a very important part of the architecture of what we've negotiated. I make no bones, I've said it before, in my view, it would be much better for the UK to seek an extension of the implementation period if we need a further period of time before we're ready for the new long-term arrangements, rather than go into the backstop. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Chancellor, and he's making a very good case about what would happen if there was a no-deal Brexit. Indeed, in his opening remarks, he described it as an act of uncertainty and economic self-harm. Given that the companies that he's talked about that depend so much on just-in-time deliveries in the motor industry and elsewhere are most worried, most concerned about the prospect of a no-deal Brexit, and as there is clearly not a majority in this House for a no-deal Brexit, whilst we may disagree about other things, why do we not unite and rule out that option?
And the way to do that, Mr. Speaker, is to support the proposal that the Prime Minister has presented to the House, which represents a compromise, ensuring that we leave the EU, that we respect the referendum decision of the British people, but we do so in a way that is designed to minimise any negative impact on our economy and maximise the opportunities for this country in the future. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. He's been very generous, and I totally concur with what he said about divided nations. But can I just urge him to be cautious about relying too heavily on forecasts, economic forecasts? We all remember the Treasury, the Bank of England, the IMF predicting economic woe by Christmas 2016 if we voted to leave, 500,000 extra unemployed, DIY economic disaster, etc. It got so bad. In the end, the Bank of England had to publicly apologise for getting it so wrong. Can we just make sure we keep things in perspective with regards to these economic forecasts?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend because he gives me the opportunity just to clarify for the House that these are not economic forecasts. They are modelled scenarios of what might happen in different circumstances. And they, like all economic modelling, they depend to an enormous extent on the assumptions that are made. The assumptions in this paper are transparent. The assumptions that the Bank of England made are also clear. And my honourable friend's made his point about the modelling that was done in 2016. I can only speak for the Treasury and tell him that a huge amount of work has been done to update and upgrade the Treasury's long-term model since 2016, and that computable general equilibrium model is the model that's been used. OK, I'll give you.
The one thing I would suggest to the Chancellor is that the problem with these forecasts is that they do not anticipate a response from government to a given set of scenarios. And that's why the forecasts in 2016, one reason, were so wrong.
My honourable friend is right. And of course, what this work is seeking to do is something quite different. It's looking at 5 different potential scenarios and ranking them in terms of the impact they will have. And I would readily concede that it is more important to look at the ranking than the absolute numbers or ranges of numbers that are attached to them. I'm just going to make a little progress, and then I will give way again. Mr. Speaker, I was saying that the benefits flowing from new FTAs would not compensate us fully for the loss of EU trade from a no-deal exit, and that is why we have fought so hard for a deal that delivers the closest possible trading relationship with the EU while respecting the outcome of the referendum and giving us the ability to form new trading arrangements with countries around the world. And today, the case for this deal is that uniquely among the options open to us, it does deliver on our commitment to leave the EU, and it delivers on our collective duty to protect the jobs and the living standards of our constituents. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Chancellor for giving way. Whilst he is explaining the deal to the House, could he explain to the House which trade unions he has sat down and briefed on the deal and what their response was? Because the feedback that I have had from ordinary trade union members in my constituency is, while this deal is preferable to no deal, it is still a long way away from the certainty that they would hope to have had in a proper arrangement they were expecting.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the deal that's on the table provides the key elements that we will need to maintain our trading relationship with the European Union. It makes a commitment to maintaining our borders as open and free-flowing as is possible. It eliminates tariffs, quotas, fees and charges. It will protect the vital supply chain business that is at the heart of our trading relationship with the European Union. I give way to my honourable friend.
My right honourable friend. Does the Chancellor agree with the Governor of the Bank of England that stress tests have shown that under every scenario the financial system is robust, and this should give the Government confidence in future negotiations to be equally robust with the EU?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Governor, of course, is absolutely right. What the modelling that the bank has done has been tested against the Financial Policy Committee's stress tests to ensure that even in this worst-case scenario, our financial system would be resilient. And the work that we've done since 2010, increasing the capital ratios of banks, introducing risk reduction strategies around banks and financial institutions, has ensured that the system will be resilient, even against the most extreme circumstance that the Bank of England has modelled. I'll just go back to my honourable friend and I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Chancellor for giving way. With regard to the issue of deal versus no deal scenario, does he agree that in terms of WTO, the problem with WTO is that it's silent on swathes of modern British industry and therefore does not cover our economy completely, aviation being one of the most obvious sectors that isn't covered by WTO. And therefore it's very dangerous for us to go into a situation if those sectors are not adequately covered.
Right, but I think the most telling point on this issue is the one made regularly by my right honourable friend, the Trade Secretary. If WTO terms were so fantastic and so good for a trading relationship, why do we need to negotiate free trade deals with all these other countries around the world? We already trade with them on WTO terms, but we clearly believe that we can do much more if we negotiate something better than WTO. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor for giving away. He's been very candid, actually. In his long-term economic analysis published recently, inside that, the two scenarios that the government are putting forward seem to be a hit to GDP and a lowering of the rate of the growth rate between 3.4% and 6.4% if there's a deal, and between 6.3% and 9% hit to GDP if there's no deal from what it would have been otherwise. In other words, a low rate of growth. Can you just confirm that that's indeed what the choice the UK government is putting before Parliament at the moment, those range of hits to GDP between the deal and no deal?
The honourable gentleman's misinterpreting this analysis. This is not, these are not rates of GDP growth. This is an estimate of the relative size of the economy at a 15-year horizon under different scenarios. In all scenarios, we expect that GDP growth would have recovered and would continue.
Mr. Sandon, can you just put on the record what he thinks these hits are going to be? He said earlier in response to a Labour member that there's going to be a lower rate of growth. What are the percentage differences in the two scenarios of the deal and no deal versus staying in the European Union?
Sorry, but the honourable gentleman's wrong. I didn't talk about a lower rate of growth. I'm talking about a smaller overall size to the economy. It is our central view that once the economy has move to a new equilibrium. Growth will resume in all of these scenarios, and our economy will go on getting larger. So the honourable gentleman says, what is the number? This is not an economic forecast. This is a modelling of 5 different scenarios. What our economic growth rate is in 2033 will depend on a raft of other issues. It'll depend on a raft of other issues. It won't depend only on the outcome of this debate. I'm going to give way to the honourable gentleman, then I am going to make some progress.
Can I thank the Chancellor for giving way? Isn't the truth is there hasn't been the time to consult with the organised trade unions because they've been consulting with the hardline Brexiteers and the ARG group instead of putting the national interest first. But can I ask the Chancellor this? Why didn't the Chancellor support his Prime Minister in her pledge to end austerity in the budget that would address many of the divides in this nation that he refers to? Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what the honourable gentleman's referring to. In the budget, I set out a clear plan for Britain's future. I set out an indicative envelope for the spending review next year, which will show public spending increasing in real terms throughout the next spending review period. And in most people's definition, that is turning a very important corner for this country. Mr. Speaker, the economic analysis published by the government last week does show clearly that of the spectrum of outcomes for the future UK-EU relationship, the modelled white paper scenario would deliver significantly higher economic output than the no-deal scenario or the FTA scenario or even the EEA scenario. The proposed future UK-EU relationship is estimated to result in economic output around 7 percentage points higher than in the modelled no-deal scenario in the long run, once the economy has reached its post-Brexit equilibrium. A deal that secures the rights of more than 3 million EU citizens living in the UK and around 1 million UK nationals living in the EU. A deal that takes us out of the European Union and sets a framework for an economic partnership with our European friends and neighbours that is closer than any other they have today, while allowing us to strike free trade arrangements around the world. A deal that ends freedom of movement and regains control of our borders, not so that we can shut down immigration, but so that we can manage it in our national interest, ensuring that our businesses and our health service still have access to the skills they need, skills that we will need as we build on our fundamental economic strengths to give Britain the brighter future our citizens imagined when they voted in June 2016. A deal that delivers on the referendum result while securing the achievements of the British people in rebuilding our economy over the past 8 years. And above all, Mr. Speaker, a deal that can bring our country together again. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
So I'm very grateful to the Chancellor. He just referred to the British citizens living in EU countries. Can he confirm that under this deal, EU citizens living in the UK will be in a better position than British citizens living in EU countries because they won't have the ability that they currently have for freedom of movement between EU countries?
British citizens living in an EU country will be able to continue living in that country as they do now. They won't necessarily have the automatic right to relocate to another EU country, and EU citizens living in the UK will have the right to continue living here. Well, the honourable gentleman's very persistent, so I'll probably regret this, but I'll do it anyway.
Well, let's hope not, Mr. Speaker. And I've tried this with the Prime Minister, and I just want the Chancellor to see if he can look the young people of this country in the eye and tell them all the restrictions we will impose on EU nationals, the EU will impose upon our young people. The rights of he and I to live, work and love across a continent of 27 will be lost to our young people. Will he just now be square with them and tell them there will now be restrictions on their freedom of movement to go to Europe too?
Mr. Speaker, the point about the deal we have negotiated is to ensure the greatest possible level of freedom, the greatest possible level of rights for UK citizens to carry on living their lives so that we can carry on working together, collaborating together, trading together with our European Union partners. And I am completely convinced that of the options open to us, this is the right way for this country to go forward. Mr. Speaker, if there is anyone on the front bench opposite who genuinely believes that there is a magic deal available which would see us retain all the benefits of EU membership, but with no free movement, no payments into the EU's budget, no state aid rules, they are sadly deluded. Labour calls for a Brexit that delivers the exact same benefits as we currently have. That is called remaining in the European Union, and it means being in the single market as well as the customs union. And last time I checked, that is not Labour policy. A customs union alone does not deliver those exact same benefits. A customs union alone would not maintain supply chains, nor remove regulatory checks and non-tariff barriers, nor deliver frictionless borders. So Labour's policy fails its own test. The time for trying to have your cake and eat it has passed. It is now time for tough choices and practical solutions, and for a focus on the things that really matter. Time to deliver a jobs-first Brexit, and that is what the Prime Minister's deal does. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful to the Chancellor for giving way. If I could move him away from the kind of party political point scoring that he's currently engaging in and ask him a serious question about what reassurance he can give to companies in Grimsby like Young's, because they rely on fresh fish products from Iceland and South Norway, both non-EU countries which do have EFTA and EEA agreements with the EU. So how does this Tory withdrawal agreement impact on the certainty of future supply to that industry that employs 5,000 people in my area?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I suspect the Honourable Lady knows, after we leave the European Union, we will be an independent coastal state. We'll be able to enter into agreements with Iceland, Norway, other countries in order to regulate quotas, the way fish is caught, the reciprocal rights of our fishermen to enter into other countries' waters and their fishermen to enter into our waters. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my honourable friend agree with me? According to the Department of Transport, if we crash out and we don't have this agreement, the hauliers of this country would only have 1,000 permits granted, and that would range from anywhere between health products, food to furniture delivery. That would be catastrophic for my constituents, because we rely on haulage predominantly in my constituency.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right, and if I may, that goes back to the question asked by my honourable friend here earlier on. If we were to leave the EU in a real no-deal scenario, where issues like this are not resolved, then we would be in a very difficult place, and the very small number of transit permits available for hauliers would be just one of the many issues that would cause very considerable difficulty. I'm just going to give way to my right honourable and learned friend for Rushcliffe.
Well, before the Chancellor started giving way, he made the point that just being in the customs union was not the sort of replicating what we have at the moment. But does he accept that were we to join Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein in the EEA and EFTA, and on top of that agree a customs union which we would need to keep the Irish border open, we could keep a very high proportion of the economic benefits of membership, even if the House insists on proceeding to give up political membership and other aspects of the EU?
Right honourable friend is right, of course, that in terms strictly of flow of trade in goods, it would be facilitated by such an arrangement. But there are two problems with the EFTA EEA model. One is that it would continue to impose upon us the obligations of freedom of movement, which we believe the British people have voted against in the referendum decision in 2016. And secondly, that it would leave our financial services industry in particular extremely exposed to having to comply with a rapidly evolving body of EU regulation over which we would have no influence. I will just give way to the honourable gentleman there and then to my honourable friend.
I'm listening carefully to the Chancellor. He mentioned frictionless trade. But where can he tell us in the political declaration does it say, I guarantee frictionless trade? It did say so in the Chequers agreement, but it seems to be omitted from what we are voting on Tuesday.
An ambition. Mr. Speaker, there's a commitment by the parties under the political agreement. There's a commitment by the parties to working in good faith together to minimise any impediments to trade between us. And we are confident that with goodwill on both sides and the evolving technologies that are available, we will be able to design a very efficient and free-flowing border for UK goods and imports from the European Union.
Thank the Chancellor for giving way. Does he agree with me that under the withdrawal agreement, the UK will continue to trade not just with the EU but with the EEA and other countries on the same basis, so that companies like Young's of Grimsby would not face a cliff edge? But if we vote against this agreement, then all is uncertain.
My honourable friend is exactly right, of course. One of the huge benefits of the negotiated deal that is in front of the House is the transition period, giving us another 2 years to the end of 2020 of clarity and certainty for British businesses about how they will operate in the future. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I will in just a moment. I'll come back to my honourable friend in just a moment. Let me be clear about the economic benefits of this deal. A time-limited implementation period, as I've just said, giving people and businesses time to adjust. A deal that ensures citizens, both British and European, are properly protected. A political agreement to construct the closest economic relationship between the EU and any advanced economy in the world. A free trade area for goods with no tariffs, no fees, no charges and no quantitative restrictions. A commitment to an ambitious relationship on services and investment, including financial services, and for further cooperation across a wide range of sectors, from transport to energy and data. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He mentioned financial services and the impact of any Norway-style arrangement on the financial services sector. But does he not also acknowledge that the proposed deal that the government is putting forward is not great for financial services by any means? It obviously employs many of my constituents in Orpington who come into London every day to work in the city in all manner of roles. But I read the government's economic analysis, and it shows that over the relevant forecasting period, financial services sector will be hit by around 6% over that forecasting period, to the effect that our trade will be 6% smaller than it would otherwise be. That is a meaningful hit to one of our most competitive industries. And we don't have many globally competitive sectors, so it baffles me why we would willingly do that. And I want to make one further point for asking a question. The agreement that the government is putting forward will mean we no longer have any direct influence on the EU's rulemaking with respect to financial services. It is therefore all the more important that we maintain our ability to play a full part in representing the UK's interests in global bodies such as the Basel Committee and IOSCO. Article 219 says we will have to follow the EU's position on all those bodies.
I think the House has captured what Jack Straw used to call the gravamen of the honourable gentleman's point. I prefer the pronunciation gravamen, but there you go. Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, let me say frankly to my honourable friend, there is no deal that is negotiable that involves leaving the EU and maintaining the financial services passport. So that is a fantasy world outcome. There isn't going to be passporting. What we have negotiated with the European Union is an enhanced equivalence approach that will allow us to maintain our vital financial services networks with the European Union in the areas where there is significant financial services trade between us, and to do so in a way that will provide the reassurance commercial companies need in London to continue operating. A mere equivalence finding, well, let me finish the point. A mere equivalence finding is of no use to a company operating a book of several $1 trillion worth of derivatives when there could be an abrupt ending of the equivalence arrangement unilaterally by one side. There has to be a more structured basis for that cooperation in the future. We've agreed that with the European Union, and I absolutely agree with my honourable friend's point that even though we will not have direct influence over new European Union rules, we can have a significant influence over the shaping both of the global rules and indeed over the European rules. Because I'd say this, over many decades of membership of the European Union, the UK has had a huge influence on the shaping of the European Union's financial services regulatory environment. And we haven't done it through voting power. We've done it through the skill, the diligence, the commitment of our civil service teams and our industry teams who've engaged in Brussels and who have provided their expertise to try to shape the European Union's financial services regulation in a way that is effective and that works for all of us, and we will carry on doing so in the future. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and I very much appreciate the realistic point that he makes about what's on offer to my constituents in the financial services sector. Would he agree that it's precisely because this is the best that we are likely to be able to get and gets us into transition where these important technical matters can be resolved, hopefully, that it has been welcomed by all the representative bodies of the financial services sector across the country?
It is exactly right. It's been welcomed by all the major bodies. It's been welcomed by the City of London. And this deal, first of all, gives us the transition period, which is a vital respite for business in preparing for the future. And it gives us a future deal, a commitment to a future deal that will protect our economy and, in particular, our financial services sector. Mr. Speaker, at the budget in October, I made a Brexit prediction. I predicted that a deal which creates confidence in a smooth transition and a close future partnership will not only protect our jobs, businesses and prosperity in the long run, but will also deliver a short-term deal dividend for Britain. The Bank of England last week published its modelling of a range of scenarios to assess the potential impact as the economy makes the necessary adjustment to reflect the new trading relationship between the UK and the EU. The bank estimated that a negotiated deal could boost British GDP by 1.75% in the short term as businesses and consumers alike express their confidence in the future, while leaving the EU on WTO rules and without a transition period could cause a recession, with GDP reduced by up to 7.75% and unemployment rising to 7.5%. The Bank of England is clear. A no-deal exit would mean jobs lost, food prices up, house prices down and wage growth lower. Businesses have made their views clear. The FSB called this deal a welcome step back from the no-deal cliff edge. The IOD warned that only 14% of their members would be ready to cope with a no-deal outcome in March, and the CBI have described no deal as a disaster for the economy. And, Mr. Speaker, this House has before it a deal which can deliver the certainty that will unlock the potential of our economy, that will assure Britain of the brighter future it craves. So let us not be the generation who have to explain to our children and our grandchildren why we let that opportunity slip from our grasp. Let's choose now to move on to that brighter future, not to go back to square one with continuing uncertainty, division and disharmony. And as we make this decision, as we exercise our solemn duty in this Parliament in the interest of the nation, let us not forget the progress that we have made and what we would be putting at risk with no deal. 8 straight years of growth, employment at a record high, 3.3 million more people in work, higher employment and lower unemployment in every region and every nation of the United Kingdom. Wages growing at their fastest pace in nearly a decade, and the proportion of low-paid jobs at its lowest for at least 20 years. And Britain leading the world in breakthrough technologies, from biotech to fintech, from robotics to genomics, at the cutting edge of a technological revolution that will underpin our prosperity and success for decades to come. if we get Brexit right. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
For the Chancellor for giving way. I've been listening carefully to his speech, and at the very beginning he said divided nations are not successful nations, and I'm inclined to agree with them. But how does he square that comment with a potentially differentiated deal for Northern Ireland that would leave Scotland at a competitive disadvantage?
Mr. Speaker, we are clear that we've negotiated this deal as the United Kingdom in the best interest of the United Kingdom and every part of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, I promise to give way to the honourable lady. And then.
Can I thank the Chancellor for giving me way? You've talked about record numbers of people in employment and unemployment being lower, but in relation to disabled people, that is not the case. So does he not agree with me that this government's record on disabled people has seen more disabled people out of work and more disabled people on lower wages?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady is just simply wrong. We have record numbers of disabled people in work, and that is a record of which this government is extremely proud. The honourable lady needs to go away and check her facts. The honourable lady.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor for giving way, and I agree with what he says about the dire problems caused by no deal. However, he described the transition period as a time in which business could prepare for the new world. The truth is, the government is going to be negotiating in parallel with those businesses trying to make changes, so they don't know what the destination is going to be, and they can't use that time because the fact is it's uncertain.
Well, the honourable lady is too absolutist. Yes, of course, there is further negotiation to be done. But the shape of the deal and the key elements of the deal are clearly set out in the political declaration. I've described some of them already in my speech today. So business will be able to begin to prepare. Of course, there will be further clarity arising during the ongoing negotiations during the transition period. I completely accept that. But I'm sure the honourable lady has done this. Talk to businesses. This is the way business wants to go. The alternatives of no-deal exit or of trying to overturn the referendum decision and risk fracturing our country for a generation are too awful to contemplate. We have to take this opportunity that is presented to us to protect our economy and to heal our country. Mr. Speaker, to protect the living standards of the people of the whole United Kingdom, we need to act now. Act now to end uncertainty and to protect jobs, businesses and prosperity, to begin to heal the divisions in our country. But what if we don't? What if we turn our backs on this opportunity of a negotiated exit and a transition to the future? I've heard that we have nothing to fear from no deal. Nothing except a cliff-edge Brexit in just 4 months' time, the end of frictionless trade with our biggest export market, restrictions on our citizens travelling in Europe, nothing except being the only developed economy in the world trading with the EU on purely WTO terms, with no customs facilitation agreements, no data sharing and protection agreements, no approvals regime to allow our industries to trade with their nearest customers and suppliers, just tariffs, paperwork and bureaucracy. UK car exports would face tariffs of 10%. Many clothing exports would face tariffs of 12%. Agricultural exports even higher. Almost 90% of UK beef exports and 95% of lamb exports go to the EU, where they could face tariffs of over 70% and 45% respectively. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank the Chancellor for giving way. Isn't it the case that the Bank of England, the Treasury, the IMF all incorrectly forecast economic woe if the people of the United Kingdom in 2016 voted to leave? Indeed, they predicted 500,000 job losses before we even Brexit. As the Chancellor has outlined very well today, our economy is growing, and importantly, employment is increasing. And there's been fantastic results since we voted to leave. And if he was standing at that dispatch box today and arguing for a WTO agreement, the City of London and everyone else would still be supporting him because they would have the leadership that the government would be giving. The fact of the matter is this country requires leadership to leave in WTO terms, not criticism about not leaving.
Well, I'm afraid my honourable friend is just wrong on the question of the financial services community and WTO. The financial services community would not support a WTO exit. That would be the worst possible scenario for financial services, with no time for preparation. And frankly, given the role of financial services in our economy, 7% of our GDP, but its even larger role in our fiscal economy, over 11%, of our fiscal revenues. Anything that damages that industry will be extremely damaging to our economy and to our public services. In the absence of any better office, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Plan B, it's Plan B.
The Chancellor's as kind as he's funny. What I want to ask him is, if he sincerely believes the situation that he's just described to us, if he cannot convince this House of that situation on Tuesday, will he resign because he's clearly lost the confidence of this House?
Mr. Speaker, I regard my job is to go on making the case for a sensible middle way out of this situation. I do not believe that we can afford the economic cost of a no-deal exit. But I equally do not believe we can afford the political and societal cost of trying to undo the decision of the British people in the referendum. We have to find a negotiated way forward, and the Prime Minister has presented us with the route forward, and we have to take it. So we have... I will give way to my...
I'm very reassured to hear what he's just said, because in his opening statement he did say that he felt Brexit might be at risk itself, which of course is very much at odds with what the Prime Minister has promised us. So can he go on reassuring people like me that the will of the people will be followed by this government?
So, Mr. Speaker, I think what I said, and my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has said many times, is that the choice before this House is very simple. It's this deal, no deal, or no Brexit. Those are the opportunities that we have to choose between. I'll give way to the honourable lady and then I will conclude.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor giving way. One of the things that really does concern business is the availability of skills with this deal. They know that there is at the moment a plan for growth, which the government has in the light of its abysmal record on productivity, but it cannot be delivered in the light that skills are migrating back to the EU. How is he going to address that?
Speaker, the government's clear that as we leave the EU, freedom of movement will end. But as I've already said, that is not the same as shutting down migration. We have to, once we regain control of our own borders, we will run our immigration system in our own interests, taking account of the needs of British society and the British economy, making sure that we have the skills that we need for our businesses to operate, for our National Health Service to function properly, but at the same time making sure that the incentives are there for businesses to train and upskill our indigenous British workers. Mr. Speaker, we have to make our choice as a nation. I'm going to give way one more time to my honourable friend, and then I really must conclude.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend giving way. The key sectors in the North West, the chemicals industry, the aerospace industry, the pharmaceutical industry, nuclear industry and food and drink, all have high-paying, high-skilled jobs. Would my right honourable friend comment on the impact of those jobs if this deal isn't agreed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend could also have said they're all industries which have a very high trade penetration with the European Union, and so they depend critically on maintaining open and free-flowing trade arrangements with the European Union. And this deal that is on the table before the House today allows us to continue to maintain those trading patterns with the European Union, to protect our supply chains, our businesses, our commercial relationships, while also having the opportunity to go out into the world and make new trading partnerships with friends, old and new, around the world. That is the best possible outcome, in my view, for the businesses in her constituency. And, Mr. Speaker, we have to make our choice as a nation, and it falls to this House to act on the nation's behalf, setting aside narrow party interests and focusing on what is in the national interest of our United Kingdom. After 2.5 years, it is time for us to choose and time for Britain to move on. And this deal will ensure that we can move forward as a nation, taking back control, protecting jobs, getting businesses investing again, growing and thriving, bringing the nation back together. It sets the United Kingdom on a course for a prosperous future, a close relationship with our biggest trading partner, and the ability to strike trade deals with the rest of the world. It supports our economy and lets us get back to the priorities that the British people elected us to deliver, investing in the infrastructure and skills of the future, keeping taxes low, reducing our debt and supporting our vital public services. So let's get on with it. Let's back this deal, honour the referendum, protect our economy and work together in the national interest to build a brighter future for our country.